Want to bring a little bit update on the Menoken farm and kind of show what's been happening and where we're going, and give you some idea of what it's all about, and to give you an invitation to actually stop out there next summer, and where we can actually go through some of the fields and get the tile spade out and dig some holes and look at some soils, and I think really analyze where these systems are at and where they can go. So let's talk a little bit about the Menoken farm. The Menoken farm was purchased in 2009, and it's owned and operated by the Burley Soil Conservation District. And so it was 150 acres of cropland. It had a history of tillage, and probably most recently fairly low diversity. Then in 2009, we planted our first crop, and there's 10 fields out there, and our intent is, how do we restore degraded soils? And I think what's happened with so many of us, and this morning's speakers talked about it some, what's happened to so many of us is we had accepted a degraded soil. And I know in my situation, working for NRCS, especially in the 80s, in Burley County, I put in so many waterways. And waterways are a pretty good symptom that you're probably not getting the water in the profile. So we had this water erosion, and we were building waterways to solve this. You know, it was sometime later that we kind of figured out we were treating a symptom, and we really needed to change what we were doing, improve the soil, and get the water in the profile. That was just kind of one of our starting points. So now we've got 10 fields where we can apply diversity, and we can take a look at the soils. We did all the usual and normal soil analysis when we started, and from that soil analysis, we'll go back someday and revisit that soil analysis, and we'll take a look at it and compare what we've done so far to date with it. But there is a sign out there, if you take the Menoken exit, just east of Bismarck, it's 1 mile south. After you take the exit, 1 mile east, and then another half south. And for those who are familiar with the countryside, it's just a half mile south of St. Hildegard's Church. So that's where you'll find the Menoken farm. And this sign will be right at the entrance, and we're just in the process of having a building put up this winter. And so it'll give us a little more of a facility. And of course, our previous location was at we were neighbors to Walmart in South Bismarck. And so if you've ever been a neighbor to Walmart and tried to get in with no-till drills and tractors and tree planting equipment, not so good. And so we think this is going to be quite a bit better for us. So as I mentioned, 2009, but really what we want to do is provide an educational site. And I don't care what your age is, we've got all ages of people out there, everywhere from infants to 90 years old. So not too concerned about your age, and I think it offers something for everyone. But there to let us take a look at moving toward these sustainable systems. We talk about sustainability, and I like to use the term moving toward it because I find it hard to capture it. But I think we can move toward it. And it's a place where we can start looking at reducing some of our fossil fuel inputs, fungicides, insecticides. When we think about those, we like to think in terms of how do we make the soil biology healthier? How do we make the biology healthier and allow it to do some of these things that we've been accustomed to applying? And so how do we bring that balance back into the soils? Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be eliminated, some might just be reduced. But how do we bring this balance forward? How do we bring herbicide diversity? So it isn't something you're going to use where we're going to use Roundup, Roundup, Roundup. We need herbicide diversity. We need a different chemistry if we're going to stay in this game. And if you think you're going to continue to use the same chemistry year after year after year, that will catch up with you because nature's a lot better at this than we are. So all of these items that we're taking a look at, minimal disturbance and reduction in the fossil fuel inputs, those are in the process. And then in addition to that, we'll take a look at compost teas, raw milk. These items all have the sound of biology again. And so when you bring in livestock or you bring in any of these products, you're looking at the biology. And so we're bringing biology to the soil. Mimicking native rangeland has always been a good template for us. Gets us really where we want to be in terms of crop diversity, cover crops, and always a continual live plant. Pollinators, we know we got 4,000 species of native pollinators in America. This is a place where we can allow them to live, find a habitat. We need the pollinators really bad. It's those things we don't always visually see. Allows us to maximize sunlight harvest and of course livestock. We brought cattle in the fall on livestock. We've also had sheep out there this summer, and Kenny will talk a little more about that. But the livestock play a huge, huge role. How do we get them out of the feedlot? How do we get them onto the land? This is just a picture of two fields side by side at the Menoken farm. The one on your left has a history of 3 years of high crop diversity, continual live plant, and cover crops. The one on the right has a history of 3 years of wheat in a row. The one on the right was fully fertilized also. It's in our control field. We have one field that we apply everything to. It's our control field, and that'd be field 3. Now this is my way of knowing if I'm kind of going in the right direction. You can see the difference in the color just in the carbon. So this is something you can do in any field. These two fields are just 15 feet apart, and we were on one of our summer tours, put the tile spade in the ground, laid these soil beds out there. You can see it visually. You can see the carbon visually. You can, when you would press these beds in your hand, you could feel a difference in the bulk density, and you can smell it. So there's so many things you can do that really help. And then a little bit of a touch as far as where we're going. And Susan Liebig, if you're here today, I didn't get a chance to visit with you, so I'll just apologize in advance and beg forgiveness later. But Susan sent me this slide the other day of the spectral data that she's working on. And we're actually taking these soils at the Menoken farm and running them through this process. And just like the quote shows, you're looking at light reflected, you're looking at wavelength, and this can determine our properties. So where I'm looking at carbon change, carbon difference, okay, in the future I can take those two PEDs and we can run them through this process and it can actually measure it for us. And it won't just be carbon. It can be phosphorus and other soil properties as well. And so this is kind of a where we're going portion of it then, if you will. And so I don't think we're ever going to replace the visual on the land, at least I hope not. But then also when we want to do a measurement, this is the way we're kind of looking at that in the future. And if you get a chance to visit with Susan, I know she was here a little earlier. She knows a lot more about this than I do, and we're just starting to look at this road as we go. This was in the Bismarck Tribune. I found this really strange because the Bismarck Tribune is not really known to run articles on soil biology, negative, positive, or any other way, shape, or form. But last month, this was in the Bismarck Tribune. Not only that, but it was on the front page. I found that was really interesting. But I think this morning's speakers talked a little bit about being able to talk to people about where their food is coming from. This is kind of an indication to me of a scenario where we probably don't have that balance in the soil biology. And so we build up the resistance. And corn rootworm is just another scenario where it's about balance. And it got discussed earlier this morning. But it's there at the Menoken farm as well. And our goal is to strengthen the soil biology. I want the soil biology to be able to address these issues. And I think that's where we ultimately want to move toward. But I found it interesting that you can come into a newspaper like the Tribune that normally doesn't do this type thing, front page, and we're looking at resistance. Of course, the answer was, well, we need to apply a different chemistry. Well, that probably is some of the answer, but the long-term answer is we need to seriously look at our rotations again, and we need to be looking at a balance of soil biology, because the soil biology can address this issue better than we can. So when we take that scenario then, and we look at moving it to where we're going, the biosoil tests that Gail Fuhrer talked about this morning, I think they do offer some things. And we sent some in this fall out from the Menoken farm, and you can see my soil probe and pail. That's as sophisticated as I got this fall, and that can do a lot for us. So I pulled some of those plugs and I took a look at some things. This is one that I looked at where I took a low crop diversity, again our field 3, which is our low crop diversity field, and I compared it to the high diversity. And you can see within that 3-year period, we're looking at a bit more fungal component in the high crop diversity. And it's been my experience in the bio tests that I've worked at the last number of years that it's the fungal component that's difficult for us to raise. And so we did have an increase in our fungal component. I was happy to see that. And it's the fungal component that I think we want to raise to try to get that balance between the bacteria and the fungi. The bacteria I find much easier to make changes on. This one was taken in the cornfield. I took 15 reps next to the corn plant itself, just an inch away from the plant. That'd be field 9, right in the corn row. And then in field 9, I went in between the corn rows, 15 inches over in the middle, where there are no plants. Now you can see there's quite a difference, right? Immediately next to the rhizosphere, next to the root, that's where our biology is. And the reason it's over there, of course, is because the root puts out root exudates, draws that biology over next to the root, and that's where the feeding frenzy begins, where the big guys eat the little guys, and the root exudates are being eaten, mineralization is occurring. So it's I think, a good analysis of that. And it played out the way the book says it's likely to play out, but it's interesting to actually test that system. It also made me think a little bit more about where we maybe want to go with row spacing in the future. This is those of you that were here 2 or 3 years ago when Ray Weil was here, Brady and Weil, the Nature and Property of Soils author. And he talked about how much of the fertility actually ends up in the plant and how much of the fertility comes from, as it says, from soil organic matter, rotation residues, etc. And I think here's where some of our efficiency lies. Here's where we can do a better job with our nitrate management. And here's where we can take a look at knowing up front that not every pound of fertilizer we're applying is going to go into that plant. Here's where we can get some of the efficiency. I think here's where the cover crops come in, the carbon-nitrogen ratio comes in. I think those are very positive things. Got a minute yet, Josh? This kind of gives you just a quick overview of 4 out of the 10 fields, and you can see wherever there's green, dark green, that's where a full season cover crop was planted. And then without any fertility, we've gone and planted our annual crops. So we're going to see how those play out, but in the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving here. On the average yields that we've been having so far, I've listed those as far as the corn and pea and the canola and the wheat, but it gives you some idea of what we're dealing with on these yields. And the interesting thing is our strong yields have been coming after cover crops. Our weaker yields are where we have a field where we haven't put the full season cover crop on yet. So it's interesting to follow that process. And as far as where we're going in the future, we want to start taking a look at bringing together our annual crops and our cover crops and put them in together. Now, that's probably easier said than done. But ultimately, I think it's going to be our next step. The Menoken farm is some place where you can go out and fail. And this should assure that we fail at something, I think. But the goal here is, how do we bring these annual crops and cover crops together? And how do we take that annual crop and harvest, or harvest a combination of them and still have the cover crop growing after we're done? And I really think that would even more closely mimic native rangeland. And some of the things we may be looking at in the future would be a canola pea with clover, or maybe a flax lentil with Italian ryegrass. So all of a sudden we're looking at a combination and looking at how this is going to play out. So if you want to look into the future a little bit, I'd look at it in this manner, and then I'd like to see the John Deere Combine take these on the go and separate them. You laugh. You laugh. This is the goal. I really think it's very doable. And I think you just need to get the engineers away from the front header a little bit and have them talking about how to handle this inside the combine. For now, we'll probably go ahead and clean and separate them with a cleaner. But I really think in the future, this is where I'd like to see us go. In my little world, this is where I think we have a shot at improving our scenario. And I just want to close with this. We're not going to go into this in any detail. But these are some of the items that I've seen over the years as building blocks. These are building blocks of soil health. And they all connect. And when you start eliminating one of them, you just weaken other ones. And so all of these connect, and there are more than what I put on here. But the font size didn't really allow me to put more of them on there. But there's even more yet. And so how do we bring these all together? How do we integrate? And with that, I'm going to turn it over